Hello and welcome back to the Troutman Pepper Lock Battery and Storage Podcast. I am your usual host, Bill Derasmo, but today I am very pleased to hand off the hosting duties to my colleagues Coby Beck and Dan Anziska, both partners at our law firm. And Coby and Dan will be interviewing Danielle Spalding, the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at Cirba Solutions. Coby and Dan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. And Danielle, we're thrilled to have you here today. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It would be great if you could first maybe give us a little background on Cirba.
Cirba Solutions has actually been around for more than 30 years. We are a battery recycling and materials company. What we do is we actually collect, transport, and then process end-of-life or scrap batteries to extract the critical materials to put them back into basically making new batteries. We've got 6 operational facilities throughout North America with a 7th opening up. And what makes us unique, not just because we've got the largest operational footprint, but also because we handle all battery formats, sizes, and chemistries.
As a fellow battery nerd, why don't we jump into, Danielle, the different formats that you've generally been working with over the past decade?
Wow. First, I love the term battery nerd. So thank you for that. I will absolutely adopt that term. So, as another battery nerd, Cirba Solution handles everything from the standard battery you find in your household, like alkaline batteries. We handle lead acid batteries, which is a standard, what you find in your car, anywhere to lithium ion batteries, which is often the most talked about chemistry, I think, very much in today's world that you'll find in for rechargeable batteries, as plus nickel metal hydride, NiCad. I mean, we even process lithium primary or metal batteries. So we do handle such a wide range of things. I think what's so amazing is that batteries have this ability to provide value beyond their initial use and at end of life that not everyone realizes. And so talking about batteries as a battery nerd is something that I love to do because they're essential to truly building a secure, a resilient, and a sustainable energy storage ecosystem and really a strong battery supply chain.
Right. So it's fair to say if you use a cell phone, you need a battery. If you use
You
a
know,
computer, you need a battery.
we are talking today, and I have, let's see here, I've got a wireless mouse, got my cell
Yep.
phone, wireless earbuds, laptop, a watch, right? I drove here in a vehicle. You name it, a battery exists in our everyday, whether it's smoke detectors, hearing aids, all the way through to what telecommunications, medical equipment. Batteries truly help drive our everyday, and it is an enabler in our ability to connect as well, whether you're a remote team member, whether you're in the office, but batteries help really ensure that we can provide something that is, I would say, powerful, if you will, is a good pun.
And Danielle, a lot of times on this podcast, we've had guests that have focused on the EV side. We've had guests that have focused on the grid scale side. I think in 2024, we had 24 gigawatts, I believe, the EIA estimate on grid scale installations for battery storage, BESS units on the bulk power system. And so as that effort scales up, and it's a critical effort because we're adding lots of renewables onto the system, and we want to firm up, so to speak, those renewables. Talk about the importance of Cirba second life applications or just recycling all of it, because it's a huge effort to scale this up.
Yes, it is. And so let's talk about one, Cirba Solutions. We handle, we mentioned all formats. So we're going to talk about battery energy storage systems. Let's talk about electric vehicles. Let's talk about, any type of battery that's going to power this every day. But if we just focus, right, on energy storage, then right now globally, believe it or not, when you think about it, especially from a recycling rate perspective, energy storage batteries are generally recycled by about 79% today. Let's round it up to 80, right? Just to give them the extra percent. But we're still finding that there's a significant, almost 20% being landfilled, and there's a small percentage, right, 2 or 3 that are being stockpiled. Now, we don't see these numbers as high in electric vehicles yet. We hope to, right? That's the end goal. And we can talk about because lead acid has really been the uninterrupted power supply battery chemistry for so long. And it really is something where the lead acid battery is a great example of something that's recycled at almost 100% today in the US and clearly highly recycled globally. But with the lithium ion battery in energy storage demand, we're finding that the gigawatt hours today is almost 225, right? Gigawatts today. That's going to double by 2027. It's going to quadruple by 2029. We are finding that energy storage is absolutely important, and batteries are set to play a real pivotal role in supporting that rapid expansion, specifically in the US data center section. And when we think about AI and the increased workload, if you will, or processing capacity that we're going to have, you need to ensure that you're providing power that's reliable, that's resilient. You have to reduce operational costs, which means the electricity prices can vary through the day. So you want something that's going to be able to store and then use as needed. You want to make sure that there's a grid infrastructure. You want to make sure that you can look at the advancements in technology as well and how it's going to help the storage. I can go on and on, of course, clearly about this topic,
Right.
but let's see as we look at this grid storage, how you see it affecting this every day because batteries are going to help power that rapid growth.
It sounds like you're already engaged in recycling lithium ion batteries, including the large scale format, including LMFP chemistry. Is that right?
Yes. So we actually process. It's always great. I can always expand the intro to be 2 sentences, or I can be on it for 20 minutes. We only have so much time. I like to get into the good stuff. I think that with Cirba Solutions, what we do is we actually process alkaline batteries, which is the most common household battery today. We process lithium, metal, and primary, which I mentioned earlier, but lithium ion, right? The big behemoth of conversation in the headlines. So we actually process that out of our Ohio facility today. We are the first to receive a grant funding from the Department of Energy, and we've been producing and processing lithium ion batteries, both end of life and scrap, at commercial scale since 2015 to what most people call black mass. We are expanding that particular site. We've already expanded capacity by 300% at the end of last year. We'll expand it another 300% this year. And then that site's going to go into what we call hydrometallurgical processing, which is really the end goal, getting the critical materials refined. For us, that's going to go to sulfates. And then our South Carolina facility will also be processing end of life and scrap lithium ion batteries.
When you talk about black mass, just for our audience, maybe walk through what I mean, that's literally after the battery is done working, you take it out, but all the good stuff is in there. You got nickel, cobalt, lithium, etc.
I actually think you did a great already definition on that. So black mass, it's a common terminology within the market, and often it's seen as a almost black powder or kind of cakeish material. And it has what we really see in the cathode side of the battery, right? You've got the anode and cathode are the two major sides of the battery. And we focus on the cathode side. And that's exactly right. You've got the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, right? Manganese, all of the critical minerals that we're talking about and seeing as pivotal parts of the supply chain and needed to increase basically this what we are seeing trajectory of demand within the market, because not only with the gigawatt increase that we've talked about already, but these batteries, as you mentioned, are going to power toothbrushes, cell phones, computers, right? When you open up a card that makes music, there's a battery in it. You think about, right, the different headbands that people wear at holidays that light up. Think about the ugly sweater that you wear during the holidays. If it lights up, there's a battery in it. Batteries are literally being integrated. And then what we were able to do is get the batteries from all of those random, material like devices and fabrics. And then we take them, we extract by shredding. And then you've got basically a sink float that separates out the materials. You do some refinement and you end up really with this beautiful black powdery material of the good stuff. And then that's what we were finding with the hydrometallurgical process that's going to be implemented here domestically.
Who are your customers on the front end and then maybe on the back end? In other words, who are the people who you're taking the spent batteries from,
Mhm.
working your magic, and then who would you sell these incredibly valuable minerals or element? Who would you sell that off to on the back end?
Right, types. Obviously, we're not asking for specifics. Well, right. I mean, we don't want to know your secret sauce. We're happy to take it, Danielle, but
Yeah, no, the
Yeah.
customer
just,
classes.
yeah, the types
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
suppliers, the collection, and the offtake type.
We get this question all the time. And the first response I'll say is, how do we collect material? Well, we talked about it from a large format battery, energy storage, electric vehicles. That's going to come from the end of life side. You're going to deal with auto scrap teams, dealerships, right? All these different range of where vehicles are then going to go. You're going to deal in production scrap. Believe it or not, that's still an upstream side. So you're going to get that from gigafactories. You're going to get that from automotive manufacturers because you have to be so specific, right? When you put a battery into an actual pack, or let's say you got to put this cell into the module when the module goes into the EV battery pack, all of that has to be just precise. And if it's not, then that needs to get scrapped and then put again because you don't want to put basically an imperfect pack into your vehicle. So we're getting it from automotive manufacturers, gigafactory scrap. We're also getting it on the small format, AA, AAA, that kind of thing from municipalities, environmental service companies. And we're also looking at this from retailers that do collections. I'll give an example like a Batteries Plus. And on the off side, after we then take those materials in, process them, extract the materials, you're going to have steel go back to steel mills, easy example. And then we're going to send our material for refinement. We focus as much as we can always in North America to have that refined so it can be used back domestically. And then eventually, what we're very happy to say is that when we refine our material to sulfates, that's going to go to PCAM or CAM, so cathode active materials or precursor cathode active materials, which is again the cathode side of the battery. And that's really where the secret sauce comes in for a lot of these battery manufacturers.
So are you telling me when I go to my Fairfax County Rec Center and there's a little receptacle for spent batteries that Fairfax County could take those batteries and sell them to you, and then you work your magic and away you go?
I'm going to say one thing on that. The answer is it is highly likely that that battery has made its way to me. But there is a misconception also in the market. We might purchase material, or you might have to pay for that material to be taken. At the end of the day, those materials are going to have to be sorted, transported, stored, and then processed. So there is a lot of actual steps that people don't recognize for batteries when they're going to be handled in end of life. So the answer is yes, it is a high likelihood that we're going to see those because we are the largest sorter of post-consumer batteries in North America. But also, I think that what our goal is to help make batteries likely more accessible in general.
Danielle, what is the biggest obstacle in terms of getting the percentage of overall batteries recycled? Is it on the collection side because they're coming from such a diverse, like you said, the Christmas sweaters to the car batteries, all the different products? Or is it on the other side of the equation?
What I would often say to that question is it's a little bit twofold. One, it's going to start with education, first and foremost, because consumers generally still do not know that batteries, one, are actually recycled, but then two, where to recycle. And if we can get those first two things out as understood within the general market, very important because even those that know how to recycle, they don't know where. I think on the other side of that, and that's usually what we would call a small format battery or a medium format battery, like a e-mobility. But for the large format batteries, in like, again, batteries and storage, right? On the storage side, a lot of it will come down to those that are handling the particular data centers or UPS, particular locations. And then on other types of large format, it could be the producer that is aiming to provide collection programs because of the high content now of those critical minerals. They're going to provide services and offerings of locations because they want those materials back in their supply chain. It took a lot of effort when we really think about this to get a battery you're going to have to travel tens of thousands of miles for those materials. Let's just say if something's coming from Australia to be extracted, it goes to China to be refined, it goes to South Korea for additional input. Then it's got to go back over to where the gigafactory is for cell manufacturing. Our goal is you can reduce transportation, you can increase jobs, you can increase economic impact to local communities, which means more base tax sales, tax for local communities, for states, and then generally for the country to help increase this. And the US can be a competitor in critical mineral supply chain.
So let's talk about, I guess, the elephant in every room right now is you're talking about this critical role of domestication
Mhm.
of supply chain and inputs into batteries. And it's no secret that Asia, particularly China,
Mhm.
have dominated much more lithium ion than lead acid battery production. Can you tell our audience a bit about, let's call them the incentives currently in place in the United States to help support domestication? And then I'll have a follow up, but I think it's helpful for you to explain it, the state of play.
There are a lot of incentives available today. I think the first real change we saw was in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, IIJA often as it's referenced. And that came out with a funding boom because it identified the need to increase domestic manufacturing in key sectors such as batteries. The second thing that happened was the Inflation Reduction Act, which not only provided tax incentives, 30D is often talked about. And I should note for all of those listening that, all of these things can change at any time. But 30D was helped to support domestic content and to hopefully also provide the consumer another incentive for purchase of things like an electric vehicle. On the other side, what the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act did was provided things for production tax credits. And that was showing that it's not just about the initial investment to get the actual project in the ground, but we want to see long term, sustained, and stable production of these critical minerals domestically. Now, a lot of this is also coming about because China controls about 70% of the global rare earth mining in general, and a staggering 85 to 90% of refining and processing. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that you're mining everything in China, but their diversified portfolio in mining that exists today is enormous. And they also have 70% of the global capacity for battery cathodes and 70% of lithium ion cells. So you think of nickel and lithium and manganese and cobalt that we've talked about. And we know nickel, a metal used in so many applications, not just batteries, but definitely in batteries today. And Indonesia produces 50% of the world's nickel, roughly. I think that number is from 2023, but it's still pretty big today. Now, China produced the seventh most. I think it was like 3% of the world's supply. But with their investments in Indonesian nickel mining operations, for example, China then imports the majority of that nickel, processes it, and then provides basically 70% of the world's processed nickel. And the key is the processing or the refining part, because that's what these cathode producers need in order then to help with the creation of the batteries. And so our goal is to help provide a stronger global competitive position for the United States in critical minerals that obviously go into batteries, but allow us to have more resilient supplies that have less geopolitical constraints put on them.
Okay, and kind of getting to brass tacks, Danielle, the Department of Energy loan and grant programs help domesticate battery and battery component and rare earth refining and processing types of facilities or factories, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
And the 30D is the consumer tax credit with respect to purchasing complying EVs, but 45X, which I think you were talking about, the PTC, the production
Yes.
tax credit, is kind of the big one because that goes to entities like yourself who are engaged in these activities. So you could access, like you've discussed earlier, the grants with the Department of Energy, plus these tax credits, which, if I recall, I think they currently still are transferable so that there's kind of real tax benefits. And then the third rung, I know I said the word incentive, but the third rung is the tariff rung, where, and this even predated the current administration, where there are significant tariffs that have been imposed or even before were scheduled to be imposed on China batteries and
Mhm.
related material coming into the US. Is that fair to say, like, these are the basket of kind of current US policies in place to help, significant manufacturing and production and help those processes along?
Absolutely. I think that we were never going to get away from talking about tariffs today, right? Because it's such a big headlines that keep going on. But overall, I think that we need to see tariffs that are happening really, they represent a strategic effort to help reshape, right, the industry's global landscape. And very much to your point is that promoting the domestic manufacturing across national security concerns related to the supply chain, right, dependencies that we have. And when we look at the incentivization of domestic manufacturing, we know that there could be a potential for short term, right, increased cost to the broader public. I think you're finding, even as recently, right, as today, that you have automotive manufacturers coming out to say we're not going to increase our prices. We're gonna make sure that we keep steady. And I think what I saw this morning was, is it General Motors that they're going to take a $5 billion right hit basically to ensure that they don't increase costs for consumers. But also remember that these large organizations, let's call it Fortune 500, just for the fact of it, they've got long-term strategies that understand that the geopolitical landscapes and the things like tariffs are always going to kind of come in and out a little bit. But what we see is that tariffs can actually help the domestic manufacturing in the long term. And that paired with the investment from IIJA, paired with the production tax credits once the facilities are now up and running because they were able to be funded, all of these are very much not just levers, but pillars, I think, to the legs that we're standing on domestically so we can create a strong and independent, right,
Right.
capability.
But to our kind of battery storage client base or our
Mhm.
projects, it's kind of understanding the role that Cirba and these types of businesses, the investments you're making, and that there is this effort to stand up a domestic, kind of a diversified domestic cutting edge battery
Mhm.
business, but it will take co-investment by the customer base because right now there's been a lot of focus and reliance on China
Mhm.
for the past decade. And it's a leap of faith, but the fact that you're investing in it and you're helping to at least keep the supply chain domestic by reutilizing these resources, and it's obviously green. I'm not sure I'm allowed to use that word anymore, but it is green. It is good for the environment, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, isn't that so important, and Danielle, that you guys are actually accomplishing this right now?
Yeah, I think that you hit on so many things in that. So let's just talk with the first thing you mentioned, which was investment. So Cirba Solutions by ourselves, we're investing well over 2 billion over the next few years to help increase the infrastructure domestically. But the US battery storage industry plans to invest up to 100 billion by 2030, right? To ensure that they can develop a domestic supply chain for grid scale, right, batteries.
Yep.
And that's amazing. I mean, we would not be having this conversation 6 years ago, right? And I think that what we have found, and with my time in the battery sector, I have seen this amazing transition of new market entries, of really aiming to focus on a true competitiveness on a global scale on recycled content. Because this is the other thing I think people don't realize, but recycled content today plays a a small percentage, right, of what we find for your minerals. But it's going to play a significant portion. Like even in lithium supply, just by 2034, over 15% of the global supply will be met by secondary content or recycled content. That number is well over a quarter, right, by 2040. But the infrastructure has to be built today. And it is one, available to you, and two, growing to help support your growth as a business when you keep investing overall. And I feel like there's so much we can talk about on that. But as you can tell, I love to get into the details.
Absolutely. What about a couple of questions, and feel free to say like no comment, Danielle.
Okay.
The first question that some clients are asking me about is your view of Department of Defense stockpile.
Mm.
Should there be a focus on these types of batteries, particularly grid scale batteries, and Department of Defense getting more involved in the batteries, the components, and the supply chain?
I think the way I would really respond to that is batteries are part of our national security. And whether we're talking grid storage, whether we're talking for the defense needs, batteries and the critical minerals within inside of them is absolutely something that should be a priority and something that we support ensuring is secured so we are not controlled by other foreign entities of concern, or FEOCs during times of not just negotiations, but if anything were to come up, we need to be able to have resiliency of that supply.
And the second question is, what if you were at a meeting right now with the administration, which no comment, you may be for all we know later today. What would your main kind of ask be, or what would you want them to understand in terms of planning the next 4 years in terms of the domestic battery industry?
I think that we have the same goals. We continue to focus. So we've been doing this for a few decades, but now more than ever, it is absolutely important that we demonstrate that we can have a domestic infrastructure that can provide significant percentage of content. It will increase jobs. It will provide our ability to reduce reliance on those FEOCs. It allows us to potentially become an exporter of refined critical minerals. And for us, we believe very much that, and we know that our position has not changed in this time because the only thing that's really evolved is that we continue to expand. We've gone from 1 site to 2 sites to 3 sites, right? About to open up our 7th. So we believe in thoughtful, strategic, right? Growth. But now what we need is we have to continue to recognize the absolute importance of those critical minerals that exist that are already in the United States, right? Once the battery gets here, let's keep it here. We don't want to export it somewhere for someone else to extract. We want to get those materials out of it today. And so we find ourselves to be a complement to mining because they get it and it's our job to keep it above ground, ensure that those materials can be reused and reused. We have over a 95% recycling recovery rate of critical minerals such as lithium that comes out of the hydro process. And that means those materials can basically be reused and reused and reused again, almost infinitely with very little loss. And that's what's going to help us grow.
Yeah, Dan, I think Danielle was very kind to you and not correcting it. It shouldn't be just 4 years. That's the problem in the United States. We're looking in too short of spurts here.
To your point, you said 10 years with China. They've been doing this well over 15. They had a long-term strategy to be the power player of critical mineral supply chain long before it was a priority for other countries. And it is something where we know that we can compete. We just have to make the commitment to do it.
I think what's important is there have been these real commitments and nascent efforts, and it's to kind of build upon that in a bipartisan way because of all the strands we've discussed. But what's important is there are these efforts, there have been these investments, there are the DOE grants and loans.
Hmm.
And there are companies like Cirba, and these aren't startups. I keep saying the companies that we've worked with, a lot of them are 20 plus years old. They're experts. They've been doing this a long time. And a lot of them started in lead acid,
Hmm.
which is a mature industry. I think another problem is there's this misnomer that these are a bunch of like Berkeley professors doing experiments. And the opposite is
Yeah.
true, right, Danielle?
You are absolutely right. There is a lot of these companies out there that are not new. And I think it's a demonstration of resilience in the marketplace that you see that these companies that have been around are now growing even more. And they've always been growing. They may not have been the loudest, but they're the largest. And the experience that is behind them, like ourselves, is the demonstration that puts trust in the market for that growth to happen.
Well stated. And I would say, by the way, just getting back to the national security point, I wrote an article for Security Magazine in 2022 that talked about possibly the need for using storage for a strategic electricity reserve as opposed to petroleum reserve. The strategic petroleum reserve is great, but as we move forward, and I think the related concept of stockpiles of strategic minerals is an idea that's worth discussing. So I just put that out there. Interesting discussion. And,
Right.
you know,
Now, there is already a stockpile that there is a DoD program right now
Hmm.
that they are entering into agreements, including with Canada and Australia and other nations in order to do that. But the question is, do we expand? Do we expand kind of trying to get batteries analogous to where chips are and viewed more directly as national security, right, Danielle?
Hmm.
Then there are all these additional programs and benefits that a
Mhm.
company like Cirba can
Mhm.
access because you're maintaining them in the domestic supply chain.
Hmm. Yes, and I think I'm going to be honest. I feel like we could do an entire podcast just on this particular topic.
Right.
sure.
But yes, and I think that from our perspective is that what you need is the resources, and when you look at that from just that perspective, you need to make sure that it's coming from a diversified source. And I don't just mean geographically, but we mean through virgin mined, through secondary or recycled content. Like there are many ways to be able to get that. We are having so much more access to technology and refining capabilities and the infrastructure today that that's what's allowing then our ability to even have this conversation is the increase in all of those things. So I feel like you've got your next topic already at this point.
I'm sure I'm speaking for Bill and Coby. We'd love to have you back maybe in 6 months when maybe there's more on the national security and policy front to
I
kind of
would love to
revisit
be.
some of these issues.
I think that there are so many things to constantly talk about and how the increasing impact to battery supply chains is happening, the changes in the geopolitical landscape, the policies that are coming out, and then all the way from even the how the automotive and energy storage industry is almost like overlap in certain ways. Lots of things to get into. Love to come back, but you guys have been fantastic hosts, and I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle. We really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great
Thank you. And again, for our clients, you can wrap up, Bill, but it's Cirba Solutions, very large battery recycling company and sulfate producer that's in the US, keeping the domestic supply chain.
Danielle, thanks so much for being on the program. It was a great conversation, and you had to deal with three of us jumping in, so you didn't know where the questions would from, but you handled it deftly, and really a great conversation. Builds on some earlier episodes we've had where we've gotten into this issue of recycling and second life. So this is really good, and I learned a lot. One last thing I guess I would ask is for folks who want to do business or are interested in continuing the conversation with you, where should they go? Where should they find out more about your company?
If you wouldn't mind, please go to cirbasolutions.com, CIRBA solutions with an S.com. You've got a lot of information both about lithium ion and many other battery chemistries, as well as how to recycle that. You can reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. But thank you again, gentlemen. It's been a real privilege for me to be able to participate today.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Copyright Troutman Pepperlock LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman does not make any representations or warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper Locke. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.